Okay, so what I observed the other day was you asked some questions about the amendments, and you asked some questions about, in these certain situations, which civil liberties apply. So what I saw was that both sets of questions were closed questions, which means that they are yes or no or finite number of answers. Right. And they definitely were right or wrong. The first set of questions about the amendments I felt were knowledge questions. You know, did they remember what these amendments were? And the next set were skill-based because they had to apply them to those certain situations. And I didn't do the tally about how many different responders because you asked the whole class for both of them. And then they, for the most part, were answered correctly. So the first question on the identity set is on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the worst lesson you've ever taught, and 10 being the best lesson you've ever taught, or the best that it could be, how would you rank that lesson?
If you're looking in terms, okay, so let me ask this, are you looking in terms of, for that particular subject, or just in terms of all lessons?
Whichever one you want to talk about.
Because if it, in terms of that subject, there's not a lot you can do with that other than applying the amendments, because it's Bill of Rights. So there's not a whole lot of difference. They did have a different assignment later on where they're having to come up with some different things. But if you're looking at in terms of other things, I'd probably say probably a 3.
A 3?
Yeah.
Closer to the didn't go as well side?
Well, I mean, it went well. It was just not as good a lesson as, it's not, to me, I just like them up and moving and doing something and coming up with something more.
Okay.
Just, that's my personal, you know, I'm not sure how we're ranking it. If we're ranking it like, do I think they learned it, or do I think that it was like this interactive, wonderful, fabulous lesson?
Okay, so interactiveness 3, but what about the way they learned it?
I'd say 8. I mean,
okay.
They got it, seems like.
So what pleased you about the lesson?
We did a lot of, like, we do kinesthetic with the hand signals for it, and that seems to really appeal to them. It gets them a little bit, keeps them awake a little bit, you know. Like First Amendment 5 parts and all the different things we do with that. So
yeah, I saw you used to do like a microphone.
Yeah, for the press, like you do. The First Amendment has 5 parts, and you have, and I use RAPs, so I use several different techniques for them to learn it. So RAPs would be freedom of religion, assembly, petition, press, and with like a microphone, and then speech. And so they tend to remember that, and then they remember the acronym as well. So there's a lot, because they have to know all parts of it, as silly as it can be. So
okay, so as far as the interactiveness, you thought it was a 3, but as far as how well they learned it, you thought it was an 8. So in either of those situations, what would have to change in order to move the lesson closer to a 10?
I'm going to change my 3 to probably a 5, just because they were, if they're doing the interaction, then they are interacting. Because I'm thinking in terms of
compared to some other things.
Yeah, you know, instead of like here's them doing a lesson on their own as opposed to me leading the lesson. Right. That was the difference. So, but yeah, with this particular subject matter, might be that they could do some research first instead of me giving them the information. We do the research of Supreme Court cases, and then it says like that this went all the way up to the Supreme Court, that Nixon kept them, the Saturday Union Press, from having this article.
Okay.
So then they'd have to identify that.
So I guess moving into that, what would your students be doing differently if your class were a 10? So we mentioned kind of, I guess, you know, we're doing building the knowledge first.
Ideally, they would take ownership of it and then like really get into it and have something that really stimulates their interest and be relevant to something that they either would encounter or have encountered. Cases that, you know, because when we talk about, you know, something in history, it's harder for them to wrap their brain around it. Because we did one it was set in the 30s. It was a Communist Party that was meeting, and they had to really, like, you got to think about what was going on at the time. This is why they were, you know, arrested for that. So something that was a little more relevant, coming up with sources that we would have, you know, that they could relate to, I think would be good. I'd love to have, I know we had mentioned something about like, where they could answer without either doing one person answering, or, because you know, if you just open it up, sometimes there'll be a lot answering and sometimes it's just one kid or two kids, and then.
Well, I will say from my observation, a question that I had was whether or not they all were getting it, or
Right.
did they look and see what everybody else was holding
Exactly, that's the thing.
up? Okay. Okay, so we talked about them more interactive. Is there anything else that you want to talk about how it would look?
I mean, I know we move a lot toward group and collaboration type things. It just depends on the lesson as to whether that would work or not.
All right, so what, how could we measure, like if you were going to try to do that lesson a little bit better, or engaging them a little bit more, or more individualized, you got to know who knows what, how would you measure that change? This is leading into the goal thing. Like, what would we?
Yeah, the only thing I could think of is I would have had to count the number of responses or compare, you know, because I'm giving a quiz over this, compare quiz grades, but
Well, if we talked about the number of responses being, I actually thought everybody responded.
yeah, there was a lot more that responded for that than is typical. I mean, we usually, you know, we have, it's a good participation class, but, you know, like you said, that you really, it's hard to tell who, if that one person actually does know it. So that would be, I just don't know how to get to the measuring point of that.
So when are you given a quiz?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, okay.
Yeah.
So not enough time to try to do something actionable before the quiz.
Probably not.
But
I mean, they'll have this information again on their test, so.
Yeah, but you could also do, I mean, because maybe what you're saying is like, you want to make sure that you know which students actually do know it. They're not just copying other people. And maybe a way to make it a little more interactive, okay? So to me, measuring that change, it would be, I guess, how they do on the quiz, and then try something different for the next part before you take a test, and then see how they do on the test. I mean, I don't really know how else to do this. So would you want that to be your goal, like to make it a little bit more interactive but more individualized so you can see who actually knows?
Yeah, I don't know, you may have been the one to tell me about something with, that I don't know if it was Pear Deck that you were talking about, where you ask them a question and they click in and then it records their answer. Was that Pear Deck you were talking about?
You can do that with Pear Deck, but the other thing I talked to you about was Ziplet.
That's what I couldn't.
That's like an exit ticket.
Okay, that was what I was thinking of.
I guess, or an entrance ticket too.
Yeah, because I do the openings like with the questions, because what I actually did there I used for my second period as their opening, and they put it down on paper. That way I can go through and look and see who, you know, they answered it, but then we went over it. So that was different, but that's tedious. It's not technology based and instantaneous, so it would be good to have something like that.
Because what I've discovered about Ziplet is like, if you have an open-ended question, so like today after they were doing the dystopia web quest, the Ziplet question was, tell me one thing that you learned about dystopias. And I can project on the board a word cloud that it is creating from their answers. You know, that where some words are bigger kind of thing. And that is above where they're answering. So on the board, they can't see what everyone else. Yeah. But you could go back through and say, oh, well, this kid really didn't get it, or whatever. Right. But but it's something for them to kind of look at.
Okay.
The other thing that I've used, because I've only done Pear Deck a couple of times, you know, it's kind of new to me as well. The other thing that I've done is Plickers, which
that was what
very low tech, but it is a really quick thing. Like even as you're scanning the room for their answers, you will know immediately if they got it right or wrong. Like it'll pop up their name, it'll be red if it's wrong and green if it's right.
Right.
And then you can show them on the board like this many of you chose this answer, and it's like, it's almost like, you can say, okay, well, I wanna know like what you guys were thinking, you know, what made you choose this answer, you know what I mean, like that kind of a thing. And I've done it in the past where I've given them a card, they keep up with it, but they don't always keep up with it.
Yeah.
I've done it in the past where I've had a set and we pass them out really quickly, and that works okay. But right now I have different folders around the room with the clickers in them.
Clickers, I was thinking.
And they can go and get them very quickly, because now they know which number they are. So it's like 1 through 5, 6 through 10, 11 through 15, etc. Because I kind of spread them out so they wouldn't
bunch up.
wouldn't all bunch up. But I think there are several quick ways to measure. So it might just depend on what you want to use.
Right.
Because you don't want to use all of them. You want to probably one or two. So the second question about the goal is, if you could hit this goal, is this something that would really matter to you?
Yes.
Like you're going to be emotionally invested. And then we've been kind of talking about number 9, what teaching strategy or technology tool could you hit to use your goal?
Yeah.
So we've
I
got
like
several.
the clickers. I like the idea of the clickers. The other I can embed as well with different things, but the clickers I think is something that I can use across the board in
you could use
other
it for several classes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then and you're just pulling, like probably when you do your review for your test or doing Kahoot or something, those same kind of questions, like the multiple choice sort of thing, is what this is going to end up being.
Right.
Okay, so what are the next steps? So what do we need to do next?
I need to learn how to use clickers.
Okay.
To see it, I'd like to see what it looks like, and then also know how to embed it in the lesson. It'd probably be easier to embed once I learn how to do it.